Sometimes the most messed up people bump into each other right when they need to the most. On a sunny summer morning in 1874, a lonely guy who lives in the mountains named Eli finds a little girl walking around lost in the Colorado wild areas. She has no family, no memories, and no name. He lets her stay with him, figuring he'll take her to town when winter comes. But as the months go by, something shifts between them. She learns to cut wood and set traps. He learns to smile again. They turn into a family out in the wild. Then some strangers show up looking for her. Guys with guns and scary questions. Eli figures out this little girl's past has deadly secrets in it. What scary truth is someone ready to kill to keep secret? Before we go back to the story, tell us where you're listening from. And if this tale gets to you, be sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've got something really special saved for you. The morning sun made long shadows through the pine trees as Eli Thorne stepped onto the rough wooden porch of his cabin, coffee steaming in his old hands. At 43, he moved himself with the careful way of a guy who had learned that staying alive meant watching every little thing. His beard, more gray than black now, framed a face scarred by years alone, and the kind of memories that made a guy want the company of mountains instead of people. The cabin was in a natural open spot halfway up the east side of what locals called Bear Mountain. Though Eli had never seen a sign of a bear in his 3 years there, he'd built the place himself, each log cut and put together with the steady care he'd learned in the war. The walls were thick enough to block the Colorado cold, the roof slanted enough to let heavy snow slide off, and the whole thing set so a guy could spot anyone coming up from the valley below way before they spotted him. This morning felt odd, though he couldn't say why. The air had that weird quiet that sometimes came before a weather change or a luck change or both. Eli had learned to trust these gut feelings during his time with the 5th Colorado Infantry. Colonel Morrison used to say that soldiers who didn't listen to their gut ended up in quick graves, and Eli had seen enough of those to last many lifetimes. He'd come to this faraway spot after Appomattox. When the war ended and left him wondering what a guy was supposed to do with skills that were only good for killing, the discharge papers he kept in an old tobacco tin under a loose floorboard told the official tale. Honorable service, hurt twice, praised for bravery at Glorietta Pass. They didn't tell the part about the dreams that still woke him some nights, or the way his hands sometimes shook when the wind blew through the trees just right, sounding like faraway gunfire. The nearest town, Copper Falls, was 15 miles down the mountain, linked to his cabin by what could nicely be called a path. Eli made the trip once a month for stuff he needed, but otherwise he lived like the rest of the world had just stopped being there sometime around 1865. He hunted deer and elk for meat, trapped smaller animals for their skins, and kept a vegetable garden that gave enough to get him through the long winters. It was a basic life, a quiet life, and most key, a life where the only person who could get hurt by him being there was himself. The sound hit him first, a thin cry that might have been a hawk or a coyote baby, except it came from the wrong way and had a tone of something that made the hair on his neck stand up. Eli set down his coffee and stepped to the edge of the porch, one hand going right to the Colt revolver he wore even for morning tasks. The cry came again, closer this time and for sure human. Eli went down the porch steps and through the open spot, following an animal path that twisted between the big pines. The forest floor was soft with years of fallen needles, quieting his steps as he went toward the sound. He found her in a small open field maybe a quarter mile from his cabin, sitting by a fallen log with her back to him. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, dressed in what used to be a nice blue dress, now ripped and dirty with dirt and something that looked like dried blood. Her dark hair hung in messes around her shoulders, and she held something small and wooden tight to her chest. Eli came up slow, the way he might come up to a hurt animal, careful with his hands out and his moves clear. "Hey there, kid," he said softly. She turned at his voice, and Eli felt something twist in his chest. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but it was her eyes that stopped him. They held a kind of empty carefulness that no kid should have, the look of someone who had seen things that would give grown guys nightmares. "Are you hurt?" he asked, bending down to her level but keeping space. She shook her head but didn't talk. The wooden thing in her hands, he could see now, was a small carved horse, the kind of toy a caring parent might make for a loved kid. One of its legs was chipped, and the paint was worn smooth in spots where small fingers had rubbed it lots of times. "Where are your folks?" Another shake of the head, stronger this time. "What's your name, kid?" This time she looked right at him, and when she spoke, her voice was just above a whisper. "I don't remember." Eli had been a soldier long enough to spot shock when he saw it. Whatever had brought this kid to his door had left her with holes where memories should be, guarding her mind from things it couldn't handle. He'd seen grown guys with the same look after really bad fights. "Well," he said, sitting on the log by her but leaving space so she wouldn't feel stuck. "That's okay. Sometimes remembering isn't the biggest thing. Sometimes staying safe is bigger." She looked at his face with those two old eyes, seeming to measure his words against some inside way of trusting. Finally, she nodded. "Are you hungry?" This time, the nod was quick and strong. "I've got bacon and eggs up at my cabin and fresh bread I baked yesterday. Want some?" Another nod with the smallest hint of a smile. Eli stood slow, holding out his hand. "My name's Eli. I live just up the hill. You can come with me if you want, and we'll get you fed and cleaned up." She looked at his held-out hand for a long time, then carefully put the wooden horse into a pocket of her dress and put her small fingers in his palm. Her hand was cold even in the warm morning, and so thin he could feel every tiny bone. The walk back to the cabin was quiet, except for their steps, and the far call of a hawk somewhere high above the trees. Eli found himself matching his steps to her shorter ones, and when she tripped over a root, he steadied her without thinking. By the time they got to the open spot, something had already changed in the careful setup of his alone life. Inside the cabin, Eli moved around his small kitchen, while the girl sat at his rough wooden table, looking around with the same careful watch she'd shown in the field. The inside was basic but clean and kept up. A stone fireplace took up one wall with shelves on each side holding his small bunch of books, mostly useful ones on farming, hunting, and animal care, plus a beat-up copy of Shakespeare's plays that had somehow made it through the war. A single bedroom took the back of the cabin, while a ladder went to a small loft he used for storage. "How do you like your eggs?" he asked, stirring the fire under his cast-iron pan. "I don't know," she said, and something in her voice meant she really didn't. That this, like her name, had been lost with whatever had brought her to his mountain. "Scrambled it is," Eli said. "That's how my mama used to make them." As he cooked, he found himself glancing at his surprised guest. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, the wooden horse now out on the table by her. There was something almost proper in how she sat, as if someone had taught her good manners that had lasted through whatever bad thing had taken her memories. When the food was ready, Eli put it on his best plates, which wasn't much, but they were clean and not chipped. The girl ate with clear hunger but surprising care, cutting her bacon into small, neat bites and chewing slowly. She finished all he gave her and looked hopeful at the pan when he asked if she wanted more. "What's that?" Eli asked, nodding at the wooden horse as he gave her more. She picked up the toy, turning it in her small hands. "I think someone made it for me. I remember hands cutting the wood, but I can't remember the face." "It's nicely made," Eli said, and meant it. The horse showed good skill with smooth lines and careful details. "Whoever carved that cared about you a lot." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away fast, as if crying was something she couldn't afford. After breakfast, Eli heated water for a bath while the girl sat by the fireplace, slowly turning the wooden horse in her hands. He'd found some old clothes in his storage trunk, a shirt that was his younger brother's, and some pants that could be tied with rope, and he left them outside the bedroom door while she washed. When she came out, clean and dressed in clothes that were too big for her small body, Eli felt that same twist in his chest from the field. She looked even younger somehow and more breakable, but also more real. The dirt and mess had hidden some signs of what she'd gone through, but it had also hidden the basic humanness that now showed through. "Much better," he said. "Now we need to figure out what to do with you." The girl's face went very still, and Eli realized his words might have sounded like a threat. "I mean," he said quick, "we need to figure out how to help you. The right thing would probably be to take you down to Copper Falls. See if anyone knows who you are or where you belong." "Please don't." The words came out fast, and for the first time since he'd found her, the girl showed real feeling. "Please, I can't. I don't want to go anywhere else." "Can I stay here?" Eli looked at her, standing there in his brother's old clothes, holding her wooden horse, and felt something break open in the careful walls he'd built around his heart. He told himself it was just for now, just until he could find a better way. He told himself a lot of things in that moment that he thought weren't fully true. "All right," he said. "You can stay for now until we figure things out." The relief that came over her face was so deep that Eli had to look away. He got busy clearing the breakfast dishes, trying to ignore the voice in his head that sounded like his old sergeant major, warning him about messes and duties he wasn't ready for. But when he looked back at the girl sitting by his fireplace, safe and warm and fed, no longer lost in the wild, that voice got quieter. Maybe some messes were worth having. The rest of that first day went quiet. Eli showed her around the cabin and the nearby area, pointing out the root cellar, the woodshed, and the small barn where he kept his mule and a few chickens. She listened close to everything he said, asking smart questions that showed a quick mind behind those careful eyes. As evening came, Eli realized he'd need to set up sleeping spots. The cabin had only one bed, and while he could sleep on the floor or in the barn, something told him the girl would sleep better knowing he was near. "You can have the bed," he said. "I'll make a bed here by the fire." "We could share," she said simply. "I don't take up much room." The pure way she said it almost broke him. "That wouldn't be right, kid. A gentleman doesn't share a bed with a lady, even a small one." She seemed to take this answer, though she watched carefully as he set up blankets on the floor. When it was time to sleep, she changed back into her clean dress and climbed into the bed, still holding the wooden horse. "Eli," she said from the dark. "Yes." "Thank you." "You're welcome." "Eli." "Yes." "Will you still be here in the morning?" The question hit him harder than he thought. "I'll be here," he said. "I promise." She was quiet after that, and soon her breathing got deep and steady. Eli lay on his made-up bed, staring at the dying embers in the fireplace and wondering what he thought he was doing. He'd spent 3 years avoiding this kind of mess, and now he'd let it right into his home. But as he listened to the soft sounds of the kids sleeping, the first time in years his cabin had anyone's breathing but his own, he found he didn't regret it. Not yet, anyway. Outside, the mountain got into its night patterns. An owl called from somewhere high in the pines, and the wind whispered through the trees with a sound like far voices. Eli had always found these sounds nice, but tonight they seemed to have a warning in them. Change was coming to Bear Mountain, whether he was ready or not. And tomorrow he'd have to start figuring out how to protect not just himself, but the small, nameless girl who had walked out of the wild and into his ordered life. The last thing he remembered before sleep got him was the sound of her voice saying his name, the first time in 3 years anyone had said it out loud in his own home. 3 weeks had gone by since the girl came, and Eli's monthly trip for supplies to Copper Falls couldn't be put off anymore. His flour barrels were almost empty, and winter was still months off. The girl, who had started answering to Little Bit when he called her that, had fit into his routine with surprising ease. But she'd never been off the mountain. "I want you to stay near the cabin while I'm gone," Eli told her as he hooked his mule to the small cart he used for supply trips. "Don't go past the open spot. And if anyone comes around, anyone at all, you hide in the root cellar until I get back." She nodded seriously, holding the wooden horse. In the weeks since she got there, it had never left her side, and Eli had seen how her thumb wore smooth spots in its painted surface during worry times. "I'll be back before dark," he promised. "There's bread and jam on the shelf and fresh water in the bucket." The ride down to Copper Falls took most of the morning, winding through thick forest and across 2 creek beds that would be bad come winter. Eli had made this trip many times, but today felt different. Every mile that got between him and the cabin felt like a weight on his shoulders. Copper Falls wasn't much of a town. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and maybe 20 houses spread along the banks of Willow Creek. But it was people stuff, and after 3 weeks of home quiet, the noise and activity felt almost too much. Eli tied his mule outside Morrison's general store and stepped onto the wooden walk. The owner, James Morrison, no link to his old colonel, greeted him with the same held-back niceness he'd shown for 3 years. Eli wasn't mean, but he wasn't very chatty either, and the town folks had learned to respect his like for quick business talks. "Morning, Eli. The usual supplies?" "That's right. Flour, coffee, sugar, salt. Maybe some of that hard candy if you've got it." Morrison raised an eyebrow at the last thing. Eli had never bought candy before, but said nothing as he started getting the asked for items. While the store guy worked, Eli heard quiet talk at the back of the store between two women he knew but couldn't name. Terrible thing, just terrible. A whole family, they say. Sheriff Hartwell thinks it was that outlaw gang from down south, the Maddox brothers. But why would they kill the kids, too? Seems pointless, even for outlaws. Eli tried not to listen, but the women's voices carried in the small space. Mary Chen at the boarding house says there was a federal marshal through here last week asking about survivors. Survivors? I heard they were all killed. That's what I thought, too. But seems there might have been a little girl who got away. The marshal was showing a photo around. Eli's blood went cold. He forced himself to keep looking at a display of tools, but every sense was now on the talk behind him. Poor kid. If she's still alive. Been weeks now, and you know what this land's like. Wild animals, the weather. Hush now. Don't talk like that. Maybe someone found her. Maybe she's safe somewhere. Morrison finished getting Eli's supplies and started adding up the cost. Hear about that mess down in Leadville? He asked like chat. Eli's mouth felt dry. What mess? Federal judge and his family killed in their beds from what I hear. Judge Carlisle. He was the one trying to clean up all that bad stuff in the territorial government. Made a lot of enemies. That's a shame, Eli managed. Sheriff Hartwell's got wanted posters up about it. Think some of those outlaws might be heading this way. Morrison lowered his voice. Between you and me, I'd keep my eyes open up on that mountain of yours. Men like that, they might think a lone cabin would be easy to take. Eli paid for his supplies with hands he hoped looked steadier than they felt. As Morrison loaded the items into his cart, Eli saw the wanted poster on the store's board. The top said, Reward, $500 for Judge Carlisle family murders. And below that, in smaller words, Suspect Maddox gang armed and very dangerous. But it was the smaller notice below that made his heart stop. Missing. Caroline Carlisle, age 6, brown hair, brown eyes, last seen in blue dress, believed to be only survivor. Any info, contact U.S. Marshal's office. The description matched perfect. The blue dress now hanging clean in his cabin. The brown eyes that held too much knowing. The age that fit exact. Something wrong, Eli? Morrison asked. Eli realized he'd been staring at the poster. No, just terrible thing like you said. He finished loading his cart and got ready to leave, but Sheriff Hartwell picked that time to come out of the saloon across the street. The law guy was a big man who'd got his job more through friends in high places than skill, but he had sharp eyes that missed little. Eli Thorne, the sheriff called. Don't see you in town much outside your regular supply runs. This is my regular supply run, Eli replied, steady. Hartwell crossed the street, his boots loud on the wood. You seen anything weird up on your mountain lately? Any strangers going through? No strangers, Eli said, which was true in a way. Well, keep your eyes open. We've got killers loose, and word is they might be coming this way. The sheriff looked at Eli's face. You hear anything about a missing girl? Every gut feeling yelled at Eli to keep his face blank. Morrison mentioned something about Judge Carlisle's family. Bad business. The little girl, Caroline, she's the judge's daughter, hasn't been found yet. Hartwell's eyes got narrow. Of course, if someone was keeping her, thinking they were doing good, they might not know they could be messing with a federal case. I think anyone who found a lost kid would want to do right by her, Eli said, careful. Of course they would, but the right thing would be to bring her to the law. Let the law handle it. The sheriff stepped closer. Funny thing is, we had some men through here yesterday. Said they were bounty hunters looking for the Maddox gang, but they seemed real interested in that little girl, too. Eli's hand went toward his gun by habit, then stopped. Bounty hunters? 3 of them? Hard-looking men. Asked a lot of questions about anyone new in the area, anyone who might be hiding something. Hartwell's smile didn't hit his eyes. I told them nobody up in these mountains keeps secrets from the law. That's right, Eli said, loading the last of his supplies. These bounty hunters say they'll be around the area for a while, checking every cabin, every farm, making sure nobody's hiding fugitives. The sheriff tipped his hat. You have a good day now, Eli. And remember, if you see anything weird, you let me know right away. Eli nodded and got on his cart, but his mind was racing. Something about the sheriff's way didn't feel right. The way he'd stressed bounty hunters with a bit of doubt. The pointed questions about keeping someone. And why would bounty hunters care about a missing girl when their target was supposed to be the outlaws who took her family? The ride back up the mountain felt forever. Every shadow between the trees might hide watching eyes. Every sound of wind through the pines might cover coming horse steps. By the time Eli got to his open spot, the sun was low, and his nerves were tight to breaking. "Little bit?" he called as he pulled up to the cabin. She showed in the doorway, still holding the wooden horse, and Eli felt relief so deep it almost knocked him off the cart. "You're back," she said, and he heard the worry she'd tried to hide. "I promised I would be." He started unloading supplies, but his moves were fast and good rather than slow. "We need to talk." Inside the cabin, with the door locked and the shutters shut, Eli sat across from the girl at his small table. In the lamplight, her match to the poster description was clear. "Little bit," he said soft. "I think your name might be Caroline." She went very still, the wooden horse stopped in her hands. "Caroline Carlyle," he went on. "Your father was a judge." The horse slipped from her fingers and hit the table. She stared at it like it had turned on her, and when she looked up, her eyes were shiny with tears not shed. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember the blood." Eli reached across the table and took her small hands in his bigger ones. "It's okay. You're safe here. They killed Mama and Papa and Thomas, my little brother." The words rushed out like a wall broke. "I hid under the stairs and they didn't see me. But I heard them talking. They said they had to find something Papa hid." Her voice broke. "What did they say?" "They said they'd come back for me. That I couldn't be allowed to tell anyone what I saw." Eli felt cold in his bones. "And Caroline, those men who hurt your family, what did they look like?" She closed her eyes, thinking hard. "One had a star on his shirt like the sheriff in town, and the others called him Marshal." "Not the Maddox gang. Federal officers. Bad law guys who'd killed a judge trying to show their crimes. And now they were coming to quiet the only witness. They're not bounty hunters," Eli said, more to himself than her. "What?" "Nothing, kid. But we need to be very careful now. Some men came to town today asking questions." "They might come looking up here." Caroline's face went white. "Will you send me away?" The question hit him like a hit. He looked at this small, brave girl who had somehow found her way to his mountain, who ate his food and wore his brother's old clothes and called his name in the dark when bad dreams woke her. "No," he said, and meant it with every part of him. "I won't send you away. We're family now, you and I, and family keeps each other safe." The relief in her eyes was so strong it almost broke his heart. "But we need to be smart about this," he went on. "If anyone comes here, anyone at all, you hide in the root cellar, and you don't come out until I come get you. Do you understand?" She nodded seriously. "Good girl." He stood and went to the window, looking out at the getting dark forest. Somewhere out there, bad men were asking questions and getting closer to the truth. The quiet life he'd made on this mountain was about to end. But as he looked back at Caroline, at his daughter in all the ways that counted, Eli felt something he hadn't felt since the war ended, a sense of goal that went beyond just staying alive. They could run, go deeper into the mountains where no one would look. But running meant living in always fear, always checking behind. And Caroline deserved better than that. No, running wasn't the answer. Eli had been a soldier once, and soldiers didn't run from a fight when innocent lives were at stake. If these bad law guys wanted Caroline Carlyle, they'd have to go through Eli Thorne to get her, and he'd make sure they regretted trying. The morning after Eli's big find brought a change in their routine that Caroline seemed to feel without words. She woke before sunup, quiet as a shadow, and found Eli already dressed and checking his weapons at the kitchen table. "Are they coming today?" she asked, sitting beside him with the wooden horse in her lap. "I don't know, kid, but we need to be ready." He set down the Colt revolver he'd been cleaning and looked at her serious. "From now on, things are going to be different. I need to teach you things that might keep you alive." Caroline nodded with the same serious okay she'd shown when he told her about her family. It hit Eli how tough kids could be, how they fit to new stuff that would break grown guys. "First thing, if I tell you to run, you run. No questions, no waiting. You go straight for the root cellar and you hide until I come for you." "What if you don't come?" The question was asked with such calm that it almost stopped his heart. "I'll come," he said strong. "But what if you can't?" Eli looked at her face, seeing not the scared kid he'd thought, but a young person who knew life had no sure things. She'd already lost everything once. She knew it could happen again. "If I can't come for you in a day and a night," he said, careful, "you follow the creek up until you reach the old trapper's cabin. You remember me showing you that place?" She nodded. "There's stuff there. Food, blankets, matches. You wait there until it's safe to go. Then you head north to Fort Collins. Tell them who you are and what happened. Can you remember all that? Follow the creek up. Trapper's cabin. Wait then, Fort Collins. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she held the wooden horse. Good girl, but that's only if something happens to me. Which it won't. The rest of that first morning, Eli started teaching Caroline things no 6-year-old should need to know. How to move through the forest without sound. How to find water and shelter. How to tell if meat had gone bad and which berries were safe to eat. She took it all in with the strong focus she brought to everything, asking useful questions that showed she got the risks. By afternoon, they'd moved to inside prep. Eli showed her how to lock the door from inside and where he kept extra ammo. He taught her to load his old Sharps rifle, though the gun was way too heavy for her to use. "Why are you teaching me this if I'm supposed to hide?" she asked as they practiced. "Because sometimes hiding isn't enough," Eli said. "Sometimes you need to know how to fight." That evening, as they sat by the fireplace eating a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Caroline asked the question he'd been dreading. "Tell me about the war." Eli almost choked on his coffee. "What? You were a soldier? I can tell by how you move, how you check corners before you go in a room." "My father talked about soldiers who came back from the war." She turned the wooden horse in her small hands. "Will you tell me about it?" Eli stared into the fire, watching the flames move over the split logs. He'd never talked about the war to anyone, not in the 9 years since Appomattox. But something in Caroline's voice, not just wanting to know, but real need to get it, made him think again. "It was a hard time," he said at last. "Men did things they never thought they'd do. Saw things they wished they could forget. Is that why you came to the mountain? To forget?" "Partly." He glanced at her, seeing not blame but caring in those brown eyes. "I lost my brother in the war, Tommy. He was younger than me, always laughing, always finding good, even in bad spots. He died at Glorietta Pass trying to save a hurt friend." Caroline's hold tightened on the wooden horse. "I'm sorry. After that, I didn't see much point in being around people. Seemed like everyone I cared about got hurt, and I was tired of hurting. But you saved me? Maybe you saved me." They sat in easy quiet for a while, the fire cracking between them. Finally, Caroline spoke again. "The men who killed my family. They're going to keep looking for me, aren't they?" Eli wanted to lie, give fake comfort. But this kid had seen too much lying already. "Yes," he said. "They are. Because I saw them." "That's right. And if they find me, they'll kill me too." Eli turned to face her full. "Caroline, listen to me. I've been taking care of myself in bad places for a long time. I know how to hide, how to fight, how to keep people safe. I won't let anything happen to you. You promise?" "I promise." She seemed to take this, but Eli could see her mind working behind those careful eyes. After a bit, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper he'd never seen before. "I found this in my dress pocket the morning you found me," she said, giving it to him. "I was too scared to show you before, but now—" Eli unfolded the paper careful. It was a kid's drawing done in pencil on what looked like fancy paper. The picture showed a simple house with a big tree by it, and under the tree a small X marked in darker pencil. "Do you remember drawing this?" he asked. Caroline shook her head. "But I think Papa told me to hide something there. In my dreams, I hear his voice saying, 'Remember the tree, Caroline. Remember where we put it.'" Eli looked at the drawing closer. The house was done in a kid's simple way, but some details suggested it might be a real place. The special shape of the tree, the spot of the windows, even what looked like mountains in the back. "But what, kid? Do you remember?" "No, but it was important." "Important enough that Papa made me draw this so I wouldn't forget." She looked at the paper in his hands. "Do you think that's what those men are really looking for? Not just me, but something Papa hid." Eli felt parts of a bigger puzzle fitting. A federal judge checking bad stuff. A kid who saw his killing. And now signs that the judge might have hidden something. Papers, proof, evidence of the bad stuff he'd been fighting. "I think you might be right," he said slow. "Your father was trying to show bad men doing bad things. Maybe he hid proof of what they did and they killed him for it." "Yes." Caroline took the drawing back, folding it careful and putting it in her pocket. "Then we have to find it. Whatever Papa hid, we have to find it before they do." Eli started to shake his head. The idea of taking a 6-year-old on what would be like a treasure hunt through bad areas seemed crazy. But before he could say no, Caroline went on, "If we find what Papa hid, we can prove what those men did. We can make sure they can't hurt anyone else." The simple thinking of it stopped him. She was right, of course. Running and hiding would only put off what had to happen. But if they could find whatever proof Judge Carlyle had hidden, they might turn the hunters into the hunted. It would be dangerous, he said. More dangerous than waiting here for them to find us. She had a point, and looking at her now, this small, brave girl who'd lost everything but still thought about keeping others safe. Eli felt something move in his chest that he hadn't felt since Tommy died. Pride and goal. That night, as Caroline slept, Eli sat at his table and started writing in a leather book he'd had for years but rarely used. In careful writing, he wrote down everything that had happened since finding her. Everything she'd told him about her family's killing and everything he thought about the bad officials hunting her. If something happened to him, someone needed to know the truth. But more than that, writing it helped him sort his thoughts, plan next steps. He'd been a soldier once, trained in plans and ways. It was time to remember those lessons. The book felt good in his hands, solid, lasting, real. Whatever came next, there would be a record. Caroline's story would last, even if they didn't. Outside, the mountain got into its night quiet, but Eli stayed up long after the fire burned to embers. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new choices. But tonight, for the first time since the war ended, he felt like he had a job worth doing. Keeping Caroline safe wasn't just about one kid anymore. It was about about making sure good guys like Judge Carlyle didn't die for nothing. It was about remembering what he'd once fought for and finding the strength to fight for it again. The find came during Caroline's bath on their 5th morning together since learning her name. Eli was outside caring for his mule when he heard her call from the cabin, her voice tight with something he couldn't tell. "Eli, could you come here, please?" He found her standing by the wash basin, wrapped in a towel, holding something small and silver in her shaking hands. Her face was pale, but her eyes had a strong will that reminded him hard of his brother Tommy. "I forgot I was wearing this," she said, holding her hand to him. "It was under my dress, hidden by the collar." The silver locket was delicate and costly, the kind of jewelry a loving dad might give his daughter on a special day. Fancy carvings covered it, flowers and vines that caught the morning light from the window. But it was what was inside that made Eli's breath stop. The photo was small but clear, showing a family of 4 posed proper in what seemed to be a photo studio. A fine man with kind eyes and a neat mustache stood behind a seated woman whose dark hair and soft smile were like the face of the little girl by her. A boy maybe 3 years old sat on his mother's lap, grinning at the camera with the free joy of a kid. "That's them," Caroline whispered. "That's my family." Eli looked at the photo careful. Judge Carlyle looked like what he'd been, a man with rules, someone who would fight bad stuff, not for power, but from real belief in fair. The woman, Caroline's mom, had smart eyes and the kind of face that showed both strength and kindness. "They look like good people," Eli said, soft. "They were." Caroline's voice was steady, but tears went down her cheeks. "Papa used to read to us every night. Mama taught me to play piano. And Thomas," her voice caught. "Thomas was always getting into trouble, but never mean trouble, just curious trouble." Eli gave the locket back to her, but she shook her head. "Look at the back," she said. Eli turned the locket over and found more carving, but this wasn't pretty. Numbers and letters were cut into the silver in tiny, neat script. RC 1872, 3745N 105 Pitt Sudolph W under the Angel's wing. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. Caroline shook her head, but her brow wrinkled in thinking. "The numbers? Papa taught me about maps. Those look like the spots he used when he was checking land fights." Eli felt his pulse speed up. "Latitude and longitude. An exact spot, probably in Colorado, given where we are. And under the Angel's wing, that has to be some kind of mark or sign." "RC," he said, thinking out loud. "Robert Carlyle. That was Papa's name. In 1872. Maybe when he hid whatever this is pointing to." Caroline took the locket back, closing it careful and putting the chain around her neck. The weight of it seemed to comfort her, a real link to the family she'd lost. "We have to find this place," she said with the same quiet will she'd shown when talking about the drawing. "Caroline, no. Listen to me." She turned to face him full, and in that moment she seemed way older than her 6 years. "Those men killed my family for something Papa was trying to show, something he cared enough about to hide proof and leave me clues to find it. If we don't follow those clues, if we don't finish what he started, then they died for nothing." The thinking was solid, but the idea of taking her into maybe enemy areas made Eli's gut tight. Still, she was right about one thing. Staying here and waiting would do nothing but make the end longer. "All right," he said at last. "But first I need to teach you more about staying safe. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." The next few days got into a strong pattern of getting ready and learning. Eli taught Caroline to ride his mule Jasper, awkward at first, then with more sure. He showed her how to read signs of coming weather, how to find direction by sun and stars, and how to move through bad areas without being seen. More key, he started treating her as a teammate rather than a kid to guard. They talked about plans and setup, weighed risks and good parts, and made backup plans for different cases. Caroline took it all with amazing focus, asking smart questions that sometimes surprised him. "If we're being followed," she said one afternoon as they practiced moving quiet through the forest, "wouldn't it be better to know who's following us than to just dodge them?" Eli stopped mid-step. "What do you mean?" "Well, if we know how many there are and what they're planning, we can make better choices about what to do next. But if we just run without knowing, we might run right into a trap." The planned thinking behind her question got to him. "You're right. Sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. And sometimes that's exactly what you want. Papa used to say knowledge was more powerful than guns. Your papa was a smart man." That evening, as they sat by the fire, planning their path to the spots on the locket, Caroline asked the question that had been heavy on Eli's mind since they'd set on this path. "What happens after we find what Papa hid?" Eli looked up from the rough map he'd been drawing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, after we show those bad men and make sure they can't hurt anyone else, what happens to us?" "To me?" The question hit harder than he'd thought. Over the past few weeks, he'd got used to having Caroline in his life, to the sound of her voice in the morning and the warmth of her being by his fire at night. The thought of losing her, even to nice relatives or government people who might want to give her a proper home, felt like thinking about another death in the family. "I don't know," he said true. "I guess that depends on what you want." She was quiet for a long time, rubbing the silver locket with her thumb without thinking. "I want to stay with you," she said at last. "You're the only family I have left. Kid, you might have relatives somewhere who—" Her voice was firm. "I remember now. Papa used to talk about it sometimes. How Mama was an only child and both their parents had died. There's nobody else, Eli, just you and me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and hope. Eli thought about the law messes, the questions that would be asked, the office hurdles they'd have to jump. Then he thought about sending this brave, smart little girl away to live with strangers. "Then you'll stay with me," he said simple. "Whatever it takes to make that legal and right, we'll figure it out." The smile that spread on Caroline's face was the first really free look he'd seen from her since that first morning in the field. "Really?" "Really. But first we have work to do." She nodded, eager, turning back to the map. "How far is it to these spots?" Eli had been figuring distances and travel time while they talked. "About 4 days' ride if we go hard. But we'll need to be careful. That area is not too far from some mining camps, and there's likely lots of folks around who might remember seeing us." "What about supplies?" "We'll pack light and live off the land as much as we can. I've got dried meat and hard bread that'll last, and we can add with what we hunt or find." Caroline looked at the map close, her finger following the path they'd planned. "When do we leave?" "Day after tomorrow. That gives us time to finish getting ready and—" A sound from outside cut him off. The far snap of a branch that was too sharp, too on purpose to be wind or small animals. Eli held up a hand for quiet and moved fast to the window, looking through a gap in the shutters. 3 riders were moving slow through the trees at the edge of his open spot, trying to stay hidden, but not quite doing it. Even in the low light, he could see they were armed and moving with the careful teamwork of men used to bad work. "Caroline," he said quiet, never taking his eyes off the riders. "Root cellar! Now!" She didn't argue or ask stuff. The locket went under her shirt, and she was moving toward the hidden entrance to their hiding place before he'd done talking. "Remember what I taught you," he whispered as she lifted the hidden trap door. "No matter what you hear, you don't come out until I come get you." "I remember." She slipped into the dark space below the floor, and Eli carefully put back the hidden entrance. To anyone who didn't know it was there, it looked like solid floor. Outside, the riders had stopped at the edge of the open spot. They were talking in voices too low to hear words, but their stance suggested they were planning their move. Eli checked his weapons, the Colt at his hip, the Sharps rifle by the door, and the old cavalry sword he'd kept from the war. Then he sat in a chair by the window where he could see the whole open spot and waited. If these were the men hunting Caroline, they were about to find out that some mountains had teeth. The riders came up slow, getting off horses at the edge of the open spot where the forest met Eli's small garden. Through the gap in his shutters, he could see them clearer now. 3 tough-faced men wearing the kind of clothes that could be for anyone from traveling sellers to paid killers. But their moves spoke of violence kept in check. The leader was a tall, thin guy with gray hair and cold eyes that looked over the cabin with pro-check. His buddies flanked him natural, hands near their weapons. These weren't local trouble or desperate outlaws. These men were hunters. "Hello, the house," the leader called, his voice having the boss tone of someone used to being followed. "We'd like a word with you." Eli stayed quiet, watching through the shutters. One of the other men, younger with a scar from his left ear to his collar, was looking at the ground near the cabin with clear interest. "Fresh tracks," the scarred guy said quiet. "Small ones. A child's been here recent." Eli's blood went cold, but he made himself stay still. Below the floor, Caroline would hear every word. He could only hope she'd remember her lessons and stay hidden no matter what. "We know you're in there," the leader went on. "We're federal marshals on official work. We need to search your place, federal marshals." Either they were lying, or Caroline had been right about seeing a badge the night her family died. Either way, Eli wasn't letting them inside. "Show me your papers," he called back, making sure his voice came from a different window than the one he was watching from. The leader reached into his coat and pulled out what looked like an official badge and papers. But at this far, and with the iffy light, Eli couldn't check if they were real. More key, real marshals didn't usually do searches at dusk without local law there. "We're checking the killing of federal judge Robert Carlyle and his family," the leader said. "We think you may have info about our check." "Don't know anything about any judge," Eli replied. The third man, who had been quiet till now, stepped up. He was younger than the others, with the kind of face that said he liked his job too much. "Funny thing," this guy said, his voice with a bit of fun. "Sheriff Hartwell down in Copper Falls said you seemed real interested in the wanted posters when you were in town last week." Eli cursed quiet. Hartwell had been more watching than he'd thought. "Guy would have to be deaf not to hear about something like that," Eli said. "Doesn't mean I know anything useful." The leader pointed to his buddies, and they started spreading out, one to the barn, another to the woodshed. They were closing him in, cutting off ways to get away. "Pro moves. Here's what we think happened," the leader went on, moving closer to the cabin. "We think that little girl, Caroline Carlyle, somehow lived through the attack on her family. We think she walked around the mountains for a while before some good person found her and took her in." Eli's finger went to the trigger of his rifle. "Now, this good person probably thinks he's doing right," the man went on, "keeping a scared little girl from more bad. But what he doesn't get is that this kid is the key to our check. Without her words, the killers might never be caught." The words were fair, even kind. But something in the guy's tone, a small stress on some words, a cold under the official nice, told Eli all he needed. These weren't law guys wanting fair. These were the killers. "Like I said," Eli replied, "I don't know anything about any little girl." The scarred guy had got to the barn and was checking the tracks around it closer. Eli watched him kneel and run fingers over the ground, following signs with the skill of someone who knew how to hunt animals and people. "2 sets of tracks here," the guy called back. Man and child from the cabin to the barn and back. "Recent, maybe this morning." The leader smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Mr. Thorne, isn't it?" "That's what the sheriff called you. Mr. Thorne. We're going to search your place now. If you help, this will go easy for everyone." "You got a warrant?" "We don't need a warrant chasing federal runaways." That was a lie. Even federal marshals needed proper papers for searches, especially on private land. But these guys weren't planning to follow lawways. The youngest of the 3 had gone around behind the cabin and was now checking the small vegetable garden. Eli watched him kneel by the potato rows, looking at something on the ground. "More tracks here," the young one called. "Looks like someone's teaching her to walk quiet army style." Eli's jaw tightened. Caroline's lessons were good, but she was still a 6-year-old kid. Against pro-trackers, even the best lessons had limits. "You were a soldier, weren't you, Mr. Thorne?" the leader asked. "5th Colorado Infantry, from what the sheriff said." Saw fighting at Glorietta Pass. Lost your brother there. The easy mention of Tommy's death hit Eli like a blow. These guys had checked him out, knew exactly who they were up against. War's been over 9 years, Eli said, but some lessons stay with a guy, like how to teach a kid army field stuff. The leader was close to the cabin now, maybe 20 feet from the door. The thing is, Mr. Thorne, we know she's here. The only question is if you're going to make this easy or hard. Eli made his choice. These guys weren't leaving without Caroline, and they weren't planning to take her alive. The only chance she had was if he could take out the threat here and now. All right, he said, standing from the window. You got me. She's here. He heard the leader laugh with Wynn. Now that's what I like to hear. Where is she? Root cellar, Eli lied. She's hiding in the root cellar. Doors around the back of the cabin. It was a thought-out risk. The root cellar he meant was real but empty. Just storage for veggies and jam. But it would pull at least 2 of them away from the cabin and give him better chances. Smart girl, the leader said. Barney, Jake, check the cellar. I'll keep our friend company. The scarred guy and the younger one went toward the back of the cabin while the leader stayed in front, his weapon now out open. Eli watched through the shutters as they went out of sight, then counted to 10. The attack came quicker than he'd thought. The cabin door burst in as the leader kicked it with force to break the wood bar. But Eli wasn't there. He'd moved to a spot by the fireplace, using the stone chimney as cover. The Sharp's rifle fired once, its deep boom echoing through the small space like thunder. The leader spun and fell, holding his shoulder but still alive. Eli was already moving, pulling his Colt as yells came from behind the cabin. She's not in the cellar. One of the guys yelled, "It's empty!" Heavy steps pounded around the cabin as the other 2 came to the front door. Eli pressed against the wall by the entrance, listening to them come. Army ways from the war came back. Angles of shot, cover, hiding. The deadly math of close fight. The scarred guy showed in the doorway first, outlined against the low daylight. Eli's Colt fired twice and the guy fell. But the third attacker was right behind, firing fast with a repeating rifle that chewed wood from the doorframe and walls. Eli dove behind his flipped table as bullets went through the space where he'd stood. The hurt leader was trying to crawl to his dropped weapon, leaving a trail of blood on the rough wood floor. "Give us the girl, and we'll make this quick," the left attacker shouted from outside. Eli didn't waste words on reply. Instead, he grabbed the old cavalry sword from its place on the wall, a weapon that had worked well at Glorietta Pass when ammo ran low and the fighting got close. Desperate, the third guy burst through the door with his rifle up, but he thought he'd face another gun, not 18 inches of sharp steel. The sword hit him in the chest before he could change aim, and he folded over the blade with a look of surprise pain. Quiet settled over the cabin like dust after a blast. Eli stood among the bodies of 3 guys who had come to kill a 6-year-old kid and felt no sorry at all. The war had taught him many things, but maybe the biggest was that some people chose to be monsters, and monsters had to be stopped. "Caroline," he called soft. "It's over. You can come out now." The hidden part of floor lifted, and her pale face showed in the opening. She climbed out of the root cellar slow, Heary's taking in the mess without backing. "Are they dead?" she asked. 2 of them. The third one's hurt bad, but breathing. Caroline walked over to the hurt leader, who was watching her with eyes full of hate and knowing. She stared down at him for a long time, and when she spoke, her voice had no fear. "You killed my family." The guy's lips twisted in what might have been a smile. "Should have killed you too, little girl. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." Caroline turned to Eli. "We can't stay here anymore, can we?" "No," he said, gentle. "We can't. Are you ready to go find what your papa hid?" She nodded, her small hand moving to touch the locket under her shirt. "I'm ready." As they got their supplies and got ready to leave the only home they'd shared, Eli felt the weight of what was ahead. The spots in Caroline's locket would lead them into unknown areas, chased by guys who would do anything to quiet the only witness to a federal judge's killing. But they had something their enemies didn't. They had each other, and sometimes that was enough to change the world. They left the cabin in the before-dawn dark when the mountain was covered in mist that would hide their tracks for the first few miles. Caroline rode behind Eli on Jasper, her arms around his waist, the feel of her small body a always reminder of what was on the line. The hurt marshal had died sometime in the night. Eli had checked before they left, but his death wouldn't give them much time. When these 3 didn't report back, others would come looking. They followed deer paths and old mining trails, staying off the main ways that would show them to other travelers. Eli had packed light but smart, food for a week, ammo, medical stuff, and the few personal things they couldn't leave. Caroline's wooden horse rode in her pocket with the mystery drawing, while the silver locket swung soft against her chest with each of Jasper's steps. By noon, they were deep in areas Eli had never gone, guided only by his compass and the spots cut into Caroline's locket. The land got more rough as they climbed. Pine forests giving way to bare stone and thin air that made Jasper breathe harder with each mile. "Tell me about your mama," Eli said during one of their rest stops. They sat in the shade of a huge rock while Jasper ate the thin grass nearby. Caroline was quiet so long he thought she might not answer. When she did speak, her voice was soft with memory. She smelled like roses. She had this perfume Papa brought her from Denver, and she'd put just a little behind her ears every morning. Caroline pulled the drawing from her pocket, unfolding it careful. "She taught me to draw. Said art was key because it helped people remember nice things even when times were hard. Sounds like a wise lady." She was. Caroline looked at the rough sketch of the house and tree. "This drawing, I remember making it. Mama was helping me, guiding my hand to make the lines straight. But Papa was the one who told me what to draw. Do you remember anything else about that day?" Caroline closed her eyes, thinking. "There were men coming to the house. Papa sent me upstairs to get my drawing stuff while he talked to Mama. They were scared, I could tell. And Papa kept saying something about insurance and making sure the truth lasts." Eli felt the puzzle parts moving in his mind. "Insurance like a backup plan if something happened to him. That's what I think, too." Caroline folded the drawing again and put it away. "Papa was always careful about everything. Mama used to tease him about keeping 3 sets of house keys just in case." They rode on through the afternoon, climbing steady toward the spots that would either solve the mystery of Judge Carlisle's hidden proof or lead them into another trap. The ground got harder, making them get off and lead Jasper through tight spots between big rocks. As evening came, they made camp in a protected dip surrounded by short pines. Eli built a small fire using dry wood that would make little smoke, while Caroline got water from a nearby stream. Their home routine had fit to the trail with easy surprise, each doing tasks without asking. "Eli," Caroline said as they shared a simple meal of dried meat and hard bread, "what happens if we find what Papa hid, but it's not enough to stop those men?" It was the question he'd been dodging all day. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if there are too many of them? What if they're too strong, and nobody believes us even with Papa's proof?" Eli looked at her face in the firelight. Despite all she'd gone through, she still looked like a kid, small and easy to hurt in his too big clothes. But her questions showed a mind dealing with grown-up stuff that would test people 3 times her age. "Then we keep trying," he said at last. "We find someone who will listen, someone who can't be bought or scared. And if that doesn't work, we find another way. What if there isn't another way?" Eli was quiet for a bit, thinking about his own past, about the choices guys made when up against no-win odds. "During the war, I knew soldiers who fought fights they couldn't win because it was the right thing. Some of them died, but their give-up meant something. It got others to keep fighting. Like Papa." "Like your Papa." He knew showing bad stuff might get him killed, but he did it anyway because someone had to stand for right. Caroline nodded, thinking, then pulled something else from her pocket. Not the drawing or locket, but a small paper Eli had never seen. "I found this too," she said, giving it to him. "It was sewn into the lining of my dress." Eli unfolded the paper, careful. Unlike the kid's drawing, this was written in a grown-up's neat script. "See, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're in danger. The spots will lead you to proof of what Morrison and his men have done. But be careful who you trust. The bad goes higher than we thought. Remember, the angel watches over those who seek fair, but only the pure of heart can find her safe spot. Your loving Papa." "Morrison," Eli said, reading the name again. "That's the same as the store guy in Copper Falls," Caroline finished. "James Morrison." Eli felt the world shift. The nice shop guy who'd sold him supplies for 3 years, who chatted about weather and asked about his health, was somehow linked to the plot that killed Caroline's family. "It could be a mix-up," he said. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. "No," Caroline said quiet. "Papa was too careful for mix-ups. If he wrote Morrison's name, it's because Morrison is part of this." Eli thought back to his last visit to the general store, remembering how Morrison had seemed extra interested in his reaction to the wanted poster, how the guy had stressed certain details about the reward and the search for Caroline, and how Sheriff Hartwell had showed up so handy, asking pointed questions about strangers on the mountain. They were watching me. He got it. Morrison was telling them about my visits, my reactions. That's how they knew to look for you at my cabin. Caroline pulled her knees to her chest, suddenly looking very young and very scared. How many of them are there? How high does this go? I don't know, kid, but your papa's note gives us hope. He says the bad goes higher than they thought, but he also says he found proof. Whatever he hit at those spots, it might be enough to show all of them. They sat quiet for a while, listening to the wind through the pines and the far call of a night bird. Finally, Caroline spoke again. Eli, are you scared? He thought about lying, giving fake comfort. But Caroline deserved true. Yes, he said. I'm scared. Not of dying. I faced that before. But I'm scared of failing you. Of letting something happen to you because I'm not good enough or smart enough or strong enough to keep you safe. You saved me from those men at the cabin. That was just fighting. This is different. This needs us to outsmart people who have stuff and links we can't even think of. Caroline was quiet for a bit, then moved closer to him, settling against his side the way she had during those quiet evenings by his fireplace. Papa used to say that David beat Goliath not because he was stronger, but because he was fighting for something that mattered more than his own life. What did David fight for? His people, his faith, the belief that right was stronger than might. She looked up at him with those serious brown eyes. We're fighting for the same thing, aren't we? For fair for my family, and for all the other people those men might hurt. Eli wrapped his arm around her small shoulders, feeling the strong will that came from her despite her size. Yes, he said. We are. Then we'll find a way. David didn't have a sword or armor, but he had something Goliath didn't. What was that? Caroline smiled, the first real happy look he'd seen from her since leaving the cabin. He had God on his side, and we have each other. As they got ready for sleep, Eli covered the fire and checked around one more time. Tomorrow they would get to the spots, and whatever Judge Carlisle had hidden would either give them the tools they needed to fight bad at the top levels, or it would lead them deeper into danger than either could think. But tonight, with Caroline sleeping peaceful beside him under stars, Eli felt something he hadn't felt since Tommy died at Glorietta Pass. He felt like he was part of something bigger than himself again, something worth the risk. In the distance, a wolf howled, not a threat, but a reminder that they were going into wild land, where living depended on brave, smart, and the ties between those who chose to go together through the dark. Eli closed his eyes and tried to rest, but sleep was a long time coming. Too many questions stayed open, and tomorrow would bring them closer to answers that might change everything. They got to the spots at midday when the sun was right overhead and made short shadows on the rocky ground. The place was nothing special at first look. A small valley between two ridges, with a few thin trees and a creek that ran with melt from higher peaks. But as they looked at the land closer, Caroline's drawing started to make sense. There, she said, pointing to a single pine that stood taller than the others near the creek bed. That's the tree from my drawing. Eli looked at the pine careful. It was old, its trunk thick and twisted, its branches wide like guarding arms. But what got his eye was the odd rock setup just past it. A natural bunch of stones that from the right spot looked almost like a figure with outstretched wings. Under the angel's wing, he said low, remembering the carving on the locket. They got off and went to the tree careful. Eli had learned in the war never to trust land that seemed too handy, too good for an ambush. But the valley stayed quiet except for the sound of water and wind through the pine needles. Caroline walked right to the base of the tree, her hands running over the bark like looking for something exact. Papa taught me about trees, she said. How they grow, how they heal when hurt, how they keep secrets in their rings. She stopped at a part where the bark looked different, smoother, as if it had grown over something put into the trunk years ago. Here, she said. There's something here. Eli pulled his knife and started working at the bark careful. It peeled away to show a small metal tube, no bigger than his thumb, that had been pushed into the tree and sealed with pine stuff. The tree had grown around it over years, hiding it full. Inside the tube was a tight-rolled oilcloth, and inside that several folded papers on legal paper. Eli spread them careful on a flat rock while Caroline watched with strong focus. The first paper was a letter to whoever finds this, record of my check into territorial bad, signed by Judge Robert Carlyle and dated 3 months before his death. But it was the stuff in it that made Eli's blood cold. "Caroline," he said soft, "I need you to listen very careful. What I'm about to read is going to change everything we thought we knew about your father's killing." She nodded, holding the wooden horse. Eli started reading out. "To anyone who finds this proof, my name is Robert Carlyle, Federal District Judge for the Colorado Territory. For the past 2 years, I have been checking a plot involving the steady steal of federal money meant for territorial growth, road build, and Indian matters. The plot reaches from local sellers to territorial officials to members of the United States Congress." Caroline's eyes got wide, but she stayed quiet. "However," Eli went on, "my check has shown that the plot is way more tricky than simple steal. The stolen money is being used to buy weapons and stuff for a private army whose end goal is to start a war with the Southern Ute tribe, so they can take tribal lands known to have big mineral stuff." Eli stopped, the meaning sinking in. "The leaders of this plot include Territorial Governor Samuel Morrison." "Morrison," Caroline whispered. "Like the store guy. His brother James Morrison, who runs a supply net through the territory, Federal Marshal William Garrett, and Congressman Franklin Pierce of Massachusetts, who has been key in getting the turned money." Eli set down the letter, his mind spinning. "Caroline, your father wasn't killed by bad local officials. He was killed by people planning to start a war." The second paper was even worse. A detailed money list showing the flow of federal cash from Washington through different middlemen to the Morrison brothers' work, weapon buys, stuff for army training, bribes to local officials. It was all written in Judge Carlyle's neat hand, but it was the third paper that showed the full horror they faced. It was a blood-marked letter, part torn, that had clearly been taken from someone else. The letter was from United States Marshal Service and was to Marshal Garrett. Caroline leaned closer as Eli read. "William, the judge is getting too close. His check has found the weapon shipments and the army training spots. We need to get rid of him and his family before he can show his finds to the territorial lawmakers. Make it look like an Indian raid or outlaw attack. The girl must not live. She's been in his study when he worked on the check and may have seen papers. No witnesses. Finish the job by month's end or the whole thing is at risk." The letter was signed with letters that made Eli's gut drop. "SM, Samuel Morrison, the territorial governor himself. They didn't kill your family because of what your father found," Eli said quiet. "They killed your family because he was about to show a plan to kill innocent people and steal their land." Caroline stared at the blood-marked letter, her face pale but strong. "How many people will die if we don't stop them? Hundreds, maybe thousands. If they get away with starting a war with the Ute, it won't just be the tribe members who hurt. Every settler, every family in the territory will be stuck in the middle." But even as the full bat of the plot got clear, Eli got they faced an almost no-win test. Governor Morrison ran the territorial government. Marshal Garrett ran federal law in the area. Congressman Pierce had pulled in Washington. How could one mountain guy and a 6-year-old girl hope to show bad that went from Colorado to the nation's top? "There's more," Caroline said, pointing to a fourth paper Eli hadn't seen. This one was different. Not a letter or money list, but a map showing spots through the territory marked with signs. Some spots were marked with crossed guns, others with dollar marks. Still others with what looked like gravestones. "Training camps," Eli got it, looking at the gun signs. "Supply spots," he added, noting the dollar marks. "And these," he pointed to the grave marks with growing horror. Caroline's voice was barely a whisper. "What are those? Massacre spots? Places where they're planning to attack Ute villages and make it look like the tribe hit first." Eli counted the marks. 7 spots, meaning hundreds of innocent lives. The last paper was a schedule written in code, but with enough clear parts that its meaning was clear. The first event was planned for less than 2 weeks away. Time to match a peaceful meet of Ute families at their usual summer grounds. "We have to stop them," Caroline said, her voice stronger now despite the tears on her cheeks. "We have to warn the Ute people and show the plot." Eli looked at the papers spread before them. Proof that could bring down governments and save lives, but only if they could get it to the right people. The issue was finding who could be trusted when bad went so high. "Your father was smart," he said, folding the papers careful. "He knew this proof would mean nothing without a way to get it to honest officials. He must have had a plan." Caroline was quiet for a bit, then pulled out the silver locket and opened it again. "Look at the carving closer," she said. "Not just the spots, but everything else." Eli checked the locket's inside under the bright mountain sun. Along the edge, almost too small to read, was another line of text he'd missed before. "Denver Post. Editor Tom Wilson can be trusted." "Tom Wilson," Eli said. "A newspaper editor in Denver." "Not just any editor," Caroline said with growing excitement. "Papa mentioned him before. He's the one writing stories about territorial bad. Papa said he was one of the few honest guys left in government." Eli felt hope moving for the first time since they'd left his cabin. A newspaper editor would have the stuff to print the proof and the links to make sure it got to federal people who couldn't be bought by territorial guys. "Denver's 4 days' ride from here," he said, "through some of the worst country in the territory. More dangerous than staying here and letting those people do massacre." She was right, of course. They had a duty that went beyond their own safe. The proof they carried could stop a war and save many lives. But as they got ready to leave the valley, Eli saw dust on the far line. Riders moving fast their way. Someone had tracked them to the spots, and from the speed of their come, it wasn't a nice visit. "Caroline," he said urgent, "we need to move now." As they got on Jasper and pushed him toward the tight path that led north to Denver, Eli got that their real trip was just starting. They were no longer just trying to live or find fare for Caroline's family. They were racing time to stop a big bad that would change the American West. Behind them, the riders got closer, and ahead lay 4 days of bad travel through land run by the very people who wanted them dead. But they had something their enemies didn't, the truth. And sometimes, if you were brave enough and lucky enough and strong enough, the truth was more powerful than all the guns and bad and government links in the world. The question was if they could stay alive long enough to prove it. The chase started for real as they left the valley with at least 6 riders seen on the ridge behind them. Eli pushed Jasper hard through land that helped their chasers, open areas where their one mule was bad matched by horses made for speed and lasting. But what they missed in raw speed, Eli made up with close knowing of mountain travel and the desperate smart of a guy keeping his kids safe. They rode through the afternoon and into evening, stopping only when Jasper's hard breathing made clear the animal needed rest. During their short stop by a mountain stream, Caroline helped Eli check their most key load. Judge Carlisle's papers now wrapped in oilcloth and tied in his saddlebags with his most loved thing from the war. "Why did you bring that?" Caroline asked, watching him clean and oil the Confederate officer's sword that had worked at Glorieta Pass. "Because sometimes old ways are best," Eli said, testing the blade's edge on his thumb. "Your father's proof is going to save lots of lives. But only if we can get it to Tom Wilson in Denver. These guys chasing us, they'll do anything to stop that from happening." Caroline looked at his old face in the low light. "You think we're going to have to fight them?" "I think they're not going to give us a choice." Eli put away the sword and tied it to his saddle. "But that's not what I'm worried about." "What are you worried about?" Eli was quiet for a bit, listening to the far sound of horse steps echoing off the canyon walls. Their chasers were closer than he'd hoped, and night was coming fast. "I'm worried about time," he said at last. "From your father's schedule, that first attack on the Ute village is set for 11 days. Even if we get to Denver, even if Tom Wilson believes us and prints the story, it might not be enough to stop what's already going." Caroline pulled the wooden horse from her pocket, turning it in her small hands the way she did when thinking hard. "Papa always said doing the right thing was more key than doing the easy thing." "That's true. And he said sometimes one person standing for right can change everything." Eli smiled despite their bad spot. "Also true. Then we keep going. We get Papa's proof to Denver and we trust that truth is stronger than lies." They got on again as full dark came over the mountains, using night cover to put more space between them and chasers. But going by moonlight was risky, and when Jasper tripped on a loose rock and almost threw them both, Eli made the hard choice to make camp. They found shelter in a shallow cave, really just a hangover in the rock face, where Eli could build a small fire not seen from the valley below. As Caroline curled in her blankets, with the wooden horse held to her chest, Eli sat watch at the cave mouth and tried to plan next moves. The direct way to Denver would take them through Copper Falls, but that was no way now. Morrison would have guys watching every way to the town. The longer mountain way would add 2 days to their trip. time they couldn't spare if they hoped to stop the killing. But there was a third choice, one that had huge risk, but might give them the help they needed. The old mining road through Devil's Canyon was risky and mostly left, but it would cut a day off their travel and go around the spots where Morrison's guys would think they'd go. Devil's Canyon got its name true. The road was little more than an edge cut into the canyon wall with a straight drop of hundreds feet on one side and shaky rock faces on the other. In winter, snowslides made it full no-go. Even in summer, rock falls and fast floods took lives of pro miners who tried the shortcut, but it was also the last spot their enemies would think they'd go. "Caroline," he said soft, shaking her gentle awake, "I need to talk to you about tomorrow." She sat up right away, fully awake in the way that showed how much her young life had already asked of her. "What is it?" Eli told about Devil's Canyon, about the risks and the possible good. He told her true that it might be their only shot to get to Denver in time, but that it could also be where they both died. Caroline listened without cutting in, her brown eyes serious in the firelight. When he done, she was quiet for a long time. "If we don't make it," she said at last, "those Ute families will die. And their kids will never get to grow up and have families of their own." "That's right. And if we don't go through the canyon, we might not get to Denver in time to save them." "Also right." Caroline nodded firm. "Then we go through the canyon." Eli felt a wave of pride at her brave mixed with heartbreaking fear for what he was asking. "It's going to be dangerous, kid. More dangerous than anything we've faced so far." "I know." She reached into her pocket and pulled out not the wooden horse, but something else, a small carved stone he'd never seen. "Papa gave me this before that night. He said it was a guardian stone, that it would keep me safe when he couldn't." She held it to the firelight, and Eli could see it was carved like an angel, its wings spread to guard. The work was great, the kind of art that spoke of deep love and careful detail. "He made this for you. He said angels watch over people who try to do good in the world. Even when things seem no hope, even when we're scared, we're never really alone." Eli thought about his own guardian angels. Tommy, who died saving a friend. Judge Carlisle, who risked all to show bad. Even Caroline, who walked into his life and gave him a reason to care beyond living. "Then we'll trust in angels," he said. "And we'll trust in each other." They spent the left hours before dawn making last gets ready. Eli spread their stuff again, keeping only the must-haves and hiding the rest in the cave where they might get them later. He checked and rechecked his weapons, cleaned his rifle, and made sure every bit of ammo was dry and easy to get. Carolyn helped with quiet good, her small hands steady as she rolled their beds and tied their water. But Eli saw she was moving different, not with the okay of a kid following grown choices, but with the on-purpose will of a teammate getting for a bad job. "Caroline," he said as they got ready to leave the cave, "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If something happens to me in that canyon, if I fall or get hurt or worse, I need you to promise you'll keep going. Take Jasper and the papers and get to Denver no matter what." Caroline's jaw set in a stubborn line he was learning to know. "Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me anyway." "No." The flat no surprised him. "No, we're family now," Caroline said, saying back his own words from what felt like forever ago. "Family doesn't leave family behind. If something happens to you, I'll try to help you. If something happens to me, you'll try to help me. That's what family does." Eli looked down at this small, fierce girl who had become the most key person in his world and got she was right. They were family in the true way. Not by blood, but by choice, by shared give up, by the kind of love that makes people ready to face no-win odds for each other. "All right," he said. "We stick together no matter what." They came out from the cave into the gray light of dawn, the mountain air fresh with the promise of another hot day. Behind them, somewhere far, armed guys were on their trail with orders to kill them both. Ahead lay Devil's Canyon, where one wrong step could mean death, and where their enemies might wait in ambush. But between those dangers lay their only real shot to get Judge Carlisle's proof to someone who could use it to stop a killing. And sometimes when the stakes were high enough and the cause was fair enough, no-win odds became just another thing to beat. As they got on Jasper and turned to the tight path that would take them into Devil's Canyon, Eli felt the weight of his brother's sword on his leg and the warmth of Caroline's small body against his back. Whatever the next day brought, they would face it together. The old mountain guy who had run from people after the war was gone, replaced by a dad who would move heaven and earth to keep his kids safe and honor the give-up of those who had died fighting for fair. And if that meant riding through the gates of hell itself, then hell had better be ready for them. Devil's Canyon was as bad as its name from the moment they went in the narrow pass. The old mining road stuck to the canyon wall like a scar, barely wide for Jasper's hooves, and falling apart at the edges where years of weather had worn the stone. To their left, the canyon wall went almost straight up, with loose rocks that could turn deadly any time. To their right, empty air dropped into dark so deep that thrown stones made no sound hitting bottom. Eli kept Jasper at a steady walk, every step on purpose and careful. The mule's mountain-raised gut helped well. The animal seemed to feel which parts of the edge were solid and which bad, stopping sometimes to test unsure ground before going. Caroline rode behind him quiet, but he could feel the tight in her small body as she pressed against his back. Her arms around his waist, and in her right hand she held the carved angel stone her dad gave her. The wooden horse stayed in her pocket, but the guardian angels stayed out, as if it being there might somehow keep them from the dangers all around. They had been in the canyon less than an hour when Eli heard the sound he dreaded, the far echo of horse steps bouncing off the canyon walls. Their chasers had found the trail and were coming into this natural death trap. "How many?" Caroline whispered. Eli listened close, trying to split the single sounds from the echo mess of the canyon. 4, maybe 5. They're moving faster than they should on this ground. Are they going to catch us? Eli thought about lying, giving fake comfort. But Caroline had earned true through all they'd shared. Probably. But catching us and stopping us are two different things. They kept on, Jasper's hooves hitting sparks from the stone as they climbed higher in the canyon. The road curved and twisted, following the natural shapes of the rock face, and with each turn, Eli hoped to see the far exit ahead. But Devil's Canyon was longer than he'd remembered, and the sound of their chasers grew steady closer. It was Caroline who spotted the ambush. "Eli," she said urgent, her voice barely heard over the wind howling through the canyon. "Up ahead, on the ledge above us." Eli followed her look and saw them. 2 guys set on a wider part of the road, maybe a quarter-mile ahead, their rifles aimed at the way. They had ridden ahead somehow, maybe taking a different path, or just pushing their horses harder than Eli thought could be. "They're trying to box us in," Hegot. "Guys behind, guys ahead, and no way off the narrow edge without falling to sure death." But Caroline was looking at the canyon wall above with the same strong focus she brought to all issues. "Eli, look at that part there where the rock is lighter. Doesn't that look like a cave opening?" Eli followed her pointing finger and saw what she meant. About 30 feet up the canyon wall, a dark shadow set a side crack or small cave in the rock. It was hardly seen, and getting to it would need climbing skills few had. "Too high," he said. "Too risky." "Not for me." Before he could stop her, Caroline had slipped from Jasper's back and was checking the rock face with knowing eyes. "Papa taught me to climb when we went to the mountains for fun. I can make it up there." "No way! Listen!" she said, urgent, the sound of coming horse steps louder. "I'm small and light. I can climb up there with Papa's papers and hide them where those guys will never find. Even if they catch us, the proof will last." Eli wanted to say no, to find some other way that didn't put Caroline at more risk, but the fight spot was no hope. They couldn't go ahead into the ambush, couldn't go back through chasers, and couldn't stay without getting caught. Sometimes the only pick was between bad and worse. "If you fall," he started. "I won't fall." Caroline was already getting climbing rope from their stuff, testing knots with the skill of someone taught well. "But if I do, you keep going. You get to Denver, and you tell Tom Wilson everything." Eli got she was turning his words back on him, asking the same promise he'd tried from her. The funny would have been fun if the spot wasn't so bad. "Caroline, promise me." The horse steps were very close now, bouncing off the canyon walls in a way that made it hard to tell exactly where their enemies were. In minutes, they would be stuck between the ambush ahead and the chase behind. "I promise," Eli said, hating every word. Caroline tied Judge Carlisle's papers in an oilskin pouch and put it over her small shoulders. The carved angel stone went in her pocket with the wooden horse, and she went to the base of the canyon wall. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. "Then you make a distraction. Make them think you're trying to fight through the ambush ahead." Eli watched her start the climb, her small fingers finding holds in the rock he could barely see. She moved with surprise, sure, testing each grip before putting weight on it, working steady up toward the dark opening in the canyon wall. The first gunshot cracked like thunder, echoing forever off the stone walls. Eli spun in his saddle and saw their chasers round the last bend. 4 guys on horseback, weapons out, closing fast. The leader was someone Eli knew from the wanted poster in Morrison's store, Marshall Garrett himself, the federal guy who had ordered the Carlisle family's kill. His face was hard with the kind of mad that came from having to chase prey through bad land instead of easy ambush. "End of the road, Thorne," Garrett called, his voice clear in the thin air. "Give us the girl and we might let you live." Eli drew his Colt but didn't shoot. Not yet. Caroline needed more time to get to the cave and hide the papers. "She's not here," he called back. "Sent her away 2 days ago." "We're not dumb," another voice from one of the guys said ahead in the ambush. "We can see her climbing the rock." Eli's heart sank. Of course they could see her. Against the light stone, Caroline's small shape was clear to anyone who looked up. More gunshots broke out, some from behind, others ahead. Bullets hit off the rock around them, making sparks and sending stone bits flying. Jasper reared in fear, his hooves scrambling for hold on the narrow edge. Eli fought to control the mule while shooting back, but the fight spot was no hope. They were out in the open on the narrow road with no place to hide, caught between 2 groups of armed guys who had every plus except desperate. Above them, Caroline had almost got to the cave opening, but the climbing slowed as she worked across a hard part, and Eli could see she was getting tired. "Come down now, little girl," Garrett shouted. "Come down and we'll make this quick." Caroline didn't answer, but Eli saw her small body pressed to the rock, frozen for a bit by fear or tired. That's when he made the choice that would bother him for the rest of his life, however long or short. He couldn't fight 4 armed guys and keep Caroline safe at the same time, but he could buy her the time to finish her job. Eli pushed Jasper ahead right toward the ambush front, his Confederate cavalry sword shining in his right hand, while his left worked the reins. It was a charge like Glorietta Pass, desperate and probably kill self, but it did its job. Every gun turned to him. Every eye followed his wild attack down the narrow edge. In that key moment, nobody watched the small girl who finally pulled herself into the cave opening and went into the dark with the proof that could save hundreds of lives. The quick-made blast things Eli had set during their short rest, mining charges made from black powder and metal bits, blew up among the ambushers with bad effect. The tight space of the canyon turned the blasts into focused weapons that scattered guys and horses. But even as his desperate move worked, Eli felt the burn hit of a rifle bullet in his shoulder, then another in his leg. Jasper tripped and went down, throwing his rider hard against the hard stone of the canyon wall. As he lost sense, Eli's last clear thought was a prayer that Caroline would remember all he'd taught her about living, because now she was really on her own. Caroline pressed against the back wall of the cave, listening to the echoes of gunshots and yelling voices that floated up from the canyon floor. Her heart pounded on her ribs as she held the oilskin pouch with her father's papers, the proof that could stop a killing if she could somehow get it to Denver. The cave was smaller than it looked from below, barely big enough for her to crouch, but it went back into the rock far enough she couldn't see the end. More key, it seemed to curve up, saying it might lead to another opening higher on the canyon wall. "Find her!" Marshall Garrett's voice carried clear in the thin air. "She can't have gone far." Caroline made herself move deeper into the cave, feeling along the rough stone walls in almost total dark. Her father's carved angel pressed on her leg through her pocket. A small nice in the scary, not knowing if Eli was alive or dead. Behind her, she could hear guys yelling orders, setting search groups. They would find a way up to the cave soon. Guys like these didn't give up easy when so much was on the line. But they would think she'd hide in the deepest part of the cave, waiting to be found like a stuck animal. Instead, Caroline climbed. The cave did slope up, and after maybe 50 feet of careful crawl, she saw a faint light ahead. The way was narrow and not comfy, barely wide for her small body, but it led steady higher into the canyon wall. As she climbed, Caroline could hear the search going below. "Cave's empty," someone yelled. She must have gone deeper into the canyon. Good. Let them waste time looking wrong while she found another way out. The passage opened sudden into a much bigger room. this one lit by bits of sun coming through cracks in the rock above. Old drawings covered the walls, petroglyphs left by people who had used this cave long before white folks came to Colorado. The images showed hunters and animals, families and events, a record of human life that lasted centuries. But it was what was in the center of the room that made Caroline's breath stop. A wooden table, clearly new made, held papers and stuff that someone had left. As her eyes got used to the dim light, she was looking at another hide spot. Papers and maps spread like someone had been working here recent. Caroline went to the table careful, her father's lessons in looking and proof helping her. The papers had handwriting she knew from the papers they'd found at the spots. Judge Robert Carlyle's neat script, but these were different papers, newer work. The top one was dated just 2 days before her family's killing. Final prep for emergency steps, it read. If this proof falls into wrong hands before print, Caroline must remember the second hide. Tom Wilson in Denver is still the only contact who can be trusted. The Angel Cave will keep what cannot be wrecked, but only until fair can be done. Caroline got she was looking at her father's backup plan, a second set of proof, even more full than what they'd found at the tree. Her father had been full, getting ready for the chance that his killers might find and wreck his first hide. But more key, he'd set away for the proof to get to Tom Wilson, even if she couldn't make the trip to Denver herself. At the bottom of the table was a leather bag with stuff, food, water, matches, and most key. A detailed map showing a path from the canyon to Denver that stayed off all main roads and towns where Morrison's guys might watch. There was also a letter just to Caroline in her father's hand. With shaking fingers, she opened the envelope and read, "My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have shown brave beyond your years to find this place. I'm proud of you, as I have always been proud. The papers in this hide will show the plot full, but you must not try to take them to Denver yourself. Instead, follow the map to Cold Spring Station, where you will find a man named Joseph Running Bear. He is a Ute who has been helping me get proof against Morrison and his plotters. Joseph will know how to get these papers to Tom Wilson safe. Trust him as you would trust me. Remember that you are loved and that your mother and I are watching over you always. Your devoted Papa." Caroline wiped tears from her eyes and fast got the papers from the table. Her father's last gift was not just the proof needed to stop a killing, but a plan to make sure it got to the right people, even if she couldn't give it herself. But as she got ready to leave the room, voices echoed from the cave entrance below. Found footprints in the dirt. She went deeper into the cave system. Search every way. She can't have gone far. Caroline got her time was up. The second cave entrance her father mentioned in his letter. It had to be the cracks in the top where light came in. But getting to them would need climbing skills even better than what she'd used to get to the cave first. As she looked at the straight shaft above her head, looking for handholds in the rock, Caroline heard something that made her blood cold. Eli's voice, weak but fighting, echoing up from the canyon floor. "She's long gone by now. Probably halfway to Denver. We'll see about that," Marshall Garrett replied. "Boys, make Mr. Thorne comfy. I want him able to watch when we find his little girl and finish what we started with her family." Caroline's hands made fists. Eli was alive but caught, probably hurt, held as bait to pull her out. The smart thing would be to get out through the upper opening and follow her father's plan to get to Joseph Running Bear at Cold Spring Station. But Caroline had learned something key during her weeks with Eli. Family didn't leave family, no matter the cost. She put her father's papers safe in the oilskin pouch and started climbing toward the light above. But instead of planning her getaway, she was planning something much riskier. If Marshall Garrett wanted to use Eli as bait, he was about to find that some bait came with hooks. At the top of the shaft, Caroline came out onto a narrow edge high above Devil's Canyon. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and she could see for miles across the Colorado Territory, pretty land that Morrison and his plotters were ready to mark with blood for money. But first, she had to save the guy who had become her dad in the ways that counted. Caroline pulled out the testimony letter she had written during their trip, a full account of all she had seen the night her family died, all she had learned about the plot and all Eli had done to keep her safe and seek fair. Even if she didn't live through what came next, the truth would last. And sometimes the truth was strong enough to change the world. She started her way down toward the guys who had killed her family, carrying the proof that would wreck them and the brave her dad had given her to face whatever came next. The little girl who had once hid under the stairs while her parents were killed was gone, replaced by someone who got that some things were worth any risk, any give-up. Fair was coming to Devil's Canyon, and it wore the face of a 6-year-old girl who wouldn't let bad win over good. Caroline's way down from the upper edge took her to a spot right above where Marshall Garrett and his guys held Eli prisoner. From her viewpoint, she could see all. Eli slumped against a rock, blood coming through quick bandages on his shoulder and leg, while 4 armed guys talked the best way to force her out of hiding. "She's just a kid," one said. "She'll come down when she gets hungry enough." "We don't have time for that," Garrett snapped. "The first weapons load gets to the army camps tomorrow. If this proof gets out before we can do the Ute attacks, all we've worked for falls." Caroline pulled the testimony letter from her pocket with a pencil bit she'd found in her father's emergency stuff. Working fast, she wrote an ad to her account. "Marshal William Garrett admits to planning attacks on Ute villages. Weapons load comes tomorrow. Caroline Carlisle, witness." She dated it and signed her name with the careful writing her mom had taught her. Then she stood on the edge where all the guys could see her. "Marshal Garrett," she called down, her young voice carrying clear in the still air of the canyon. The guys spun to her, weapons up, but she was too high and the angle too bad for good shots. "You want to talk to me? Then let's talk." Garrett stepped up, shading his eyes to see her better. "Come down here, little girl. No one's going to hurt you if you help. The same way you didn't hurt my mama and papa and little brother." Even from far, Caroline could see the marshal's face tighten. That was sad business. "Your dad should have stayed out of it. Papa's business was keeping innocent people from killers like you." Caroline held up the oilskin pouch with all her dad's proof. "I know about the weapon loads. I know about the planned attacks on the Ute villages. I know about Governor Morrison and Congressman Pierce and all your plans to steal tribal land." "Doesn't matter what you know," Garrett called back. "Ain't nobody going to believe a 6-year-old girl's word against federal officers." "Maybe not," Caroline said. "But they'll believe this." She held up the testimony letter, making sure he could see it clear. "This is my full words about the night you killed my family. All I saw, all I heard, everyone who was there. I wrote it all and I signed it and I gave copies to people already going to Denver. It was a lie, but a plan won." Garrett couldn't know for sure she hadn't got word to friends during their trip. "You're bluffing," Garrett said, but there was not sure in his voice now. "Am I? How did I know about Congressman Pierce? How did I know about the weapons coming tomorrow? How did I know you're planning to blame the Ute for attacks you're going to do yourself?" Caroline saw some of Garrett's guys swap nervous looks. They were paid guns, not plot guys, and the size of what they'd got into was clearly making them not comfy. "Here's what's going to happen," Caroline went on, her voice getting stronger with each word. "You're going to let Eli go. You're going to ride away from here and never come back. And then you're going to pray that when this all comes out, and it will come out, that people remember you showed mercy to a kid and a hurt guy. And if we don't?" Caroline smiled, and there was nothing kid-like in it. "Then you're going to find that 6-year-old girls can be very dangerous when they have nothing left to lose." She pulled a bunch of dynamite from her dad's emergency stuff, mining blasts he'd hidden with the papers. The sticks were old, but still good, and the fuses long enough for what she thought. "This whole canyon is not stable," she called down. "One good blast in the right spot and half the canyon wall comes down. You'll be buried so deep they'll never find your bodies." It was another bluff. Caroline had no plan to bring down the canyon with Eli still stuck below. But Garrett couldn't know that, and his guys were already backing from the cliff base. "She's crazy," one yelled. "Kid's crazy enough to do it." "Shut up," Garrett snapped. But Caroline could see doubt in his stance. "I'm not crazy," Caroline said calm. "I'm just my father's daughter, and Judge Robert Carlisle didn't raise a little girl who backs down from bullies and killers." She struck a match and held it near the dynamite fuse. "You have 30 seconds to start riding away. After that, we'll see who's bluffing." Garrett stared up at her for a long time, and Caroline saw the exact moment he got she meant every word. Whatever else about Marshal William Garrett, he wasn't dumb enough to call a bluff that might kill him. "This isn't over," he called up. "Yes, it is," Caroline replied. "It's been over since the night you killed my family. You just didn't know it yet." Garrett pointed to his guys, and they started to their horses. But as they got ready to leave, Caroline called down one more time. "Marshal Garrett, the dynamite was a bluff, but my words weren't. By tomorrow, everyone in Denver will know what you've done. By next week, everyone in Washington will know. You can run if you want, But you can't hide from the truth. As the riders went into the far, Caroline made her way careful down to where Eli waited. His hurts were bad but not kill, and his eyes bright with pride and surprise. "How did you?" "Where did you?" "Papa left a backup plan," Caroline said, helping him up. He thought of everything. 3 weeks later, Caroline stood in the offices of the Denver Post, watching Tom Wilson read the final checks of the story that would bring down a plot from Colorado to Washington. Joseph Running Bear had been true, helping them get to Denver and linking them with federal checkers who couldn't be bought or scared. The Ute attacks had been stopped. Governor Morrison was under federal charge. Congressman Pierce had quit in shame. Marshall Garrett and his left guys were in federal hold, waiting trial for killing and plot. "This is great work," Tom Wilson said, looking up from the papers. "Your dad would be very proud." Caroline nodded, her hand going without thinking to touch the silver locket at her throat. Beside her, Eli sat in a wheelchair, his hurt legs still healing, but his eyes bright with good. "What happens now?" Caroline asked. "Now you go home," Wilson said, gentle. "You've done your part. Let the grown-ups handle the rest." Caroline looked at Eli and he smiled. "Home sounds good to me. I think it's time we had a normal life for a while." 6 months later, Caroline sat at the same rough wooden table where she'd first eaten Eli's food, but everything had changed. Legal papers on the table said her official adopted by Eli Thorne, making their chosen family law real. A new wooden horse sat by her plate, this one carved by Eli himself, to replace the one lost in their adventure. Outside, the first snows of winter were starting to fall on Bear Mountain, but the cabin was warm and safe. Eli had built an add-on to make room for Caroline's growing bunch of books, and she'd started a small garden that would bloom come spring. "Caroline," Eli said as they finished their evening meal, "do you ever think about what might have happened if you'd never walked into that field where I found you?" Caroline thought the question serious. "I think Papa sent me to you. I think he knew you'd need someone to care for, and I'd need someone to care for me." Eli reached across the table and took her small hand in his old one. "I think you're right." That night, as Caroline got into her own bed in her own room, she pulled out the carved angel stone her dad had given her long ago. The newspaper clips on her nightstand told the tale of fair done and lives saved, but the real tale was simpler. Sometimes broken people found each other at just the right time. Sometimes little girls grew to be stronger than anyone thought. And sometimes, when the stakes were high enough and the cause was fair enough, love was more powerful than all the bad and hurt in the world. Caroline Thorne, no longer Carlisle, no longer no name, closed her eyes and listened to the known sounds of Eli moving in their home, checking doors and covering the fire before getting ready for night. These were sounds of safe, of family, of a future that went ahead bright with chance. She had started this trip as a lost kid with no name and no family. She was ending it as someone's loved daughter, around by the kind of peace her parents would have wanted for her.